Tartaglia, one of the best team players in Genshin Impact. He is a great main DPS for a large variety of different teams, and I already went over some in my full Tartaglia guide video, but within this video I would like to give you my top 5 teams that I can make for Tartaglia. Now this starts with very serious and strong teams, and in the end we will also go over some more fun teams and some less Abyss 12-esque teams. So let's go. The number 1 team that I would like to talk about is Tartaglia International with Tartaglia, Xiangling, Kazuha and Bennett. This is his best team in my opinion. It does a ridiculous amount of damage. It is not too bad to pull off, as the rotation is simply you Bennett ult, you pop your Xiangling ult, you use Tartaglia's E until Pyronado wears down, and then you cover up the downtime with Kazuha, with Bennett charging up Xiangling, and you go at it again. This team works perfect for Tartaglia because Kazuha gives you insane buffs and strips and gathers up all the enemies for you. Then Xiangling just does insane pyro damage, while you can do great AoE damage to the grouped up enemies with Kazuha and also constantly apply Hydro to them for Xiangling to hit really nasty damage. For me it's around 40k, but I've seen people hit 60 to 70k on her Pyronado. And Bennett is just heals and a big damage boost. All in all, it's a very reliable team. The next team is Nahida Hyperbloom. Now Tartaglia is great in here because he can apply a ton of Hydro and it works really well with Nahida's E. So you use Tartaglia, Nahida, Kazuha and Cookie Shinobu. Cookie is there to proc the Hyperbloom obviously. Kazuha groups up the enemies so that you can actually properly AoE them and still just does great damage. Nahida applies Dendro to the enemies and applies a debuff that keeps applying Dendro to the enemies. And then Tartaglia can consistently keep hitting them with his Hydro damage. And then with the Cookie Shinobu E activated, it will constantly proc Hyperbloom around him, dealing amazing damage to the enemies. This is probably the comp that hits the most numbers per second and can hit insanely hard. I've used some low level cookies and Nahida here and it still cleared Abyss floor 12 in a absolute rampage. Now the third team is a very Tartaglia centered team. It is Tartaglia main DPS. You go Tartaglia, Beidou, Albedo and Bennett, or you can also go Zhongli, and Albedo can be swapped for so many units. Like a Fischl, like a Raiden Shogun. There's many options here. But it all centers around giving as many off-field buffs like Beidou's Elemental Burst and Albedo's E, so that when you pop your Tartaglia E skill, you can do as much damage as possible. Now the reason that Beidou works really well here is because you can constantly proc Electro Charged and also bounce your ult between enemies to deal a great amount of AoE damage, but also good damage to like 2 or 3 targets, which we often see in Abyss. This team is quite fun as your Tartaglia feels really powerful, and it also is an excuse to use Beidou, who is one of the coolest 4 stars in the game. So I quite like this team. Then for the fourth team, we have a really fun team that is Electro Charged Tartaglia. I play it with Tartaglia, Raiden Shogun, Yae Miko, who can also be replaced by again Fischl or Beidou, and Bennett because he's just a very reliable healer. Now, I really like swapping the ultimates around between Tartaglia and Raiden Shogun, so I use my Tartaglia elemental skill, make it have a about 7 to 8 second cooldown, and then swap to the Raiden Shogun to use her elemental burst. And in the time I'm done with the Raiden Shogun, I can do some Yae Miko Bennett action, and once I'm back to Tartaglia, his elemental skill is also off cooldown, so I can constantly keep going. And there's never really any breaks in this team. The most fun part about this team is when enemies are clumped up together, you constantly proc Electro Charge because Yae Miko is applying Electro all the time and Raiden Shogun is also just applying a ton of Electro with her E. And this chains the enemies and constantly makes you hit in AoE. And it in general is an incredibly satisfying team, while also being really good at handling bosses. Because Raiden Shogun is great at handling bosses, Yae Miko has a great elemental burst for bosses, and then Tartaglia gets a little bit of bonus damage on his normal attacks because of the constant Electro Charge procs. So all in all, I think this team is quite reliable, especially if the enemies are weak to Electro. I often use it there. Now for the final team, the Tartaglia freeze comp. Now for this freeze comp I use Tartaglia, Ayaka, Kazuha and Zhongli. Now there are many varieties of this team that you can play. You don't even necessarily need a shielder because if the enemies are constantly frozen, they don't attack you as much. Someone like Rosaria can be slotted in here, Xin, Xiao or Shenhe, so there's many varieties of it, but this is the best for my team. I use Kazuha to gather up all the enemies for me, so I can either apply freeze or I can apply Hydro to them. And then I use a tag team kind of battling between Ayaka and Tartaglia to freeze the enemies and constantly AoE them either on Tartaglia or use Ayaka's burst to deal a large amount of damage to them. This team is quite versatile and it works really well with Ayaka's dash applying cryo and other abilities and Tartaglia's great hydro application. The cooldowns bounce off each other nicely as long as you don't use Tartaglia's elemental skill for too long. So to conclude, as you can see, Tartaglia really has a lot of creativity in the teams that you can play him. Because he applies the strongest element in Genshin Impact, Hydro, incredibly well, he can enable so many different teams. And if you have Tartaglia or you are planning on pulling him, I highly incentivize you to look through all the units that you currently have in your Genshin Impact roster and make a team of your strongest units that you think might work. And you might be surprised with how good it actually works because of the versatility of the Hydro reactions, etc. So I would like to thank you a lot for watching and I wish you a wonderful day.